Madam Chair, council members, and participants, we are now live.
Okay. Good morning. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. Ms. Sherrills, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Quinones Sanchez. Councilmember Bass.
Good morning. I am present. Good morning.
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Councilmember Squilla.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Madam Chair. Present.
Councilmember Dom.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Brooks. And,
Good morning. I'm present.
Good morning.
and Councilmember Parker.
Present.
Good morning. Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless regarding resolution number 210208. Ms. Sherrills, will you please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 210208, a resolution authorizing the Philadelphia City Council Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless to hold public hearings examining the race gap in home appraisals and its impacts on home ownership and wealth accumulation in Philadelphia.
Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. The chair recognizes Majority Leader Parker, the sponsor of this resolution, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Woman Gaultier, and members of the City Council Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. Today, the committee is hearing my resolution number 210208 and will examine the race gap in home appraisals and its impact on home ownership and wealth accumulation in Philadelphia. It's with that in mind, Madam Chair, that I want to say a huge thank you to you, along with members Squilla, Johnson, Jones, Heenan, Bass, Brooks, Dom, Gilmore Richardson, Green, Gim, and Thomas for being the chief co-sponsors of this resolution. I know that there are some people who are presenting today, Madam Chair, and some of them I haven't seen in a very long time, and some who their participation encouraged me to take a stroll through our history as it relates to consumer protection and this city council of Philadelphia. And it's with that in mind that before we begin, I want to say a huge thank you to our good friend Ira Goldstein, who is the president of Policy Solutions for the Reinvestment Fund. I hated to do this, Madam Chair, because I would in essence begin telling my age, but I went back and did a Google search in the early 2001, council member and Madam Chair Gautier, when I was a staffer in this body, working for then Council Member Marion Tasco, when we passed the toughest anti-predatory lending legislation in the nation right here in City Council. We defined it with Judge Annette Rizzo. We were able to work and provide a vehicle through the courts that allowed people to sit down and have a conversation before mortgage foreclosure actually became a reality. And all of those consumer protection efforts, they were born out of that 2001 legislation. I am really frustrated, to be quite frank, that we are here where we are right now. Here we are in 2021 at this hearing, looking at how race impacts home appraisals from three different angles, Madam Chair. The first is how the race of the homeowner impacts the appraisal. The race of the homeowner, how it impacts the appraisal. Second, how the overall race of the neighborhood impacts the appraisal. And then third, how the race of the appraiser impacts the appraisal. The origins of this hearing came from conversations with Ira Goldstein, and he was the chief connector to a new friend who we're looking forward to hearing from, Professor Gregory Squires. And we're going to hear from both of them on today. On February the 25th, I wrote an op-ed with Ira along with Professor Squires that was published in WHYY's Plan Philly, and it was entitled Home Appraisals Drive America's Racial Wealth Gap. 95% of Philly's appraisers are white. Today,
Sherelle, I think you muted yourself, Sherelle.
I apologize. Thank you, Member Squilla. The origins of this hearing came from conversations with Ira Goldstein, who was the chief connector with Professor Squires. We're going to hear from both of them. On February the 25th, I wrote an op-ed with Ira and Professor Squires that was published in WHYY's Plan Philly, and it was entitled Home Appraisals Drive America's Racial Wealth Gap, and demonstrated that 95% of Philly's appraisers are white. Today, Ira and Professor Squires, they're going to present some of the information that was printed in that op-ed, but we are also going to hear from some national experts, Madam Chair Gautier and Vice Chairman Jones, such as Jillian White, Morgan Williams, John Russell, and Mark Austin. Finally, we will hear from the local on the ground practitioners such as Michael Cunningham, Carlo Batts, and Annette Collier. Michael, I hate to call you out, but because I'm telling your age too. I first met Cunningham when he was with the organization called EPOP. And I was the staffer for Councilwoman Tasco, and it was called, I believe, the Eastern Pennsylvania Organizing Political Organizational Project, when we were working on predatory lending and the Logan Sinking Homes area. So it's good to see him. I want to thank each and every one of them, Madam Chair, for attending today, for the very thoughtful testimony that each of them have provided. I've had a chance to read it, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. I want you to know that I'm most interested in this hearing, and I want to hear two different things from you. First, if you have any quantitative or qualitative information on the scope of the problem, whether we're talking about it from a national perspective or a local perspective, I want those who are testifying to please share. The one thing I realized in preparing for the story is the anecdotes abound about individuals who are facing discrimination in the appraisal process. For example, I talked to someone who knew of a Black Philadelphia woman, listen, who removed all evidence in her house that she lived in her home. She hid in her closet when the appraiser came, and then she had a white friend to literally pose as the homeowner. But this is just an anecdote and not quantitative or qualitative data. Secondly, if you have any potential solutions, because again, we want to be solutions oriented, and we don't want to become what two good friends will call expert AOPs. That is just expert articulators of the problem, but we don't have any solutions to proffer. So I'm interested in hearing them. They can be national solutions, state solutions, or local, because we want to take an intergovernmental approach. Give to our federal legislators, our state delegations, and or address here. In addition to that, the solutions can be either, in the private sector or the public sector. Again, I want to say thank you to all of you who are here today. I look forward to hearing from you. And Madam Chairwoman Gaultier, I have to say to you and your staff, thank you so very much for the expeditious manner in which you all work to get this hearing organized. I'm grateful and truly appreciate you and your professionalism, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader. I also wanted to note for the record that Councilmember Jones is present. Good morning, Councilmember.
Good morning, Madam Chair. And can you allow me to hear what that abbreviation was? Expert articulators of the problem. Can you say that again?
I like that term too.
You said it right. You said it right, Whip Jones. Expert AOPs. They become expert articulators of the problem, and I don't own it. I don't want to plagiarize. That's Bill Miller and Charmaine Matlock Turner. I learned that when I was a youngin'.
I think we're all going to be using that after today. Thank you. But we're all going to be trying not to be that. And I just wanted to thank you, Majority Leader Parker, for your resolution and also for shining a light on this topic. I think the undervaluing of homes is also contributing to gentrification and displacement in communities of color. It's a cycle that deprives homeowners of color of opportunities to build wealth and pushes them to accept offers for their homes that are much less than their homes are worth. And as a result of this undervaluation, homeowners are selling their homes for far less than the market value just for the new owner to resell at or even above market price shortly thereafter, resulting in a total shift to the neighborhood's landscape. So it's inequitable all around. And I thank you so much for your leadership in bringing this issue to light. Are there any other members of the committee that would like to give opening remarks?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Council Member.
Just briefly, as an established citizen, I'm not going to call myself old, but I went through the process that this hearing's topic is on. And I must tell you, in order to sell my old house to buy my new house, and other than the birth of my children, that was some of the most trying, most difficult times I've ever experienced. And as someone who has been involved with construction as head of the Minority Business Enterprise Council for 4 years and PCDC for a dozen years, I knew a little bit about construction and the things that take it up. But it's like being your own lawyer or your own doctor. You can't perform surgery on yourself or try your own case, or you shouldn't. And it was traumatic. And if you are not knowledgeable, if you are of limited understanding of what valuation is and what comparables are, you can get taken advantage of. And so I want to thank the Majority Leader for bringing this to our forefront. This city prides itself on having high degrees of minority home ownership. And if we are to, in future value of real estate in the city of Philadelphia, going to protect that investment, that equity, then we better take on this issue. And I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, and Majority Leader for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Jones. Okay, Ms. Sherrills, will you please call the first panel or witness we have to testify this morning?
Yes. Panel 1 will be Jillian White, Morgan Williams, Ira Goldstein, and Gregory Squires, in that order.
Okay. Good morning, good morning, Jillian White. Are you connected and ready to proceed?
Yes, I am connected and ready to proceed.
Okay.
And I'm just going to...
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Okay, my name is Jillian White. And I'm actually going to share my screen here because I have a presentation, and then we can get started. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Great. So good morning, Chairwoman Gautier and members of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. My name is Jillian White, and I'm here to testify on resolution number 210208. I'm an appraiser of 18 years, a former New York State Appraisal Board member, and I'm the head of the appraisal department at a mortgage bank called Better.com. And so to begin, I want to introduce you all to my parents, Curtis and Sandra White. And this is their house here in the background. Many years ago, my parents decided that they wanted to refinance their home. And at that point in time, we had a conversation about whether or not it made sense to erase ourselves from the home in order to give it the best opportunity of appraising for the highest value. And my family went through this exercise 2 years prior in preparation for a sale of their home. But for the refinance, we took a look at the house and had a conversation about whether or not it made sense to remove the photograph of my Uncle Robert, who passed away in '98, whether or not it made sense to remove the photograph of my Aunt Lou, who passed away in 2013, the removal of my brother's kindergarten through 12th grade classroom photos, the removal of his graduation photo, removal of all of our prom photos, photos of us around the house, photos of me and my siblings when we were children, and also the removal of any Black literature or books on African American studies. And so this image right here is of one shelf in one room of the house. And so since we had gone through the exercise before, we know it's not only time consuming, but humiliating as well. So my parents made the determination they were not going to erase themselves in preparation for the appraisal. They had a great deal of equity in the home, and they said they were going to let the chips fall where they may. However, one concession was made. Since I was an appraiser, my parents asked me to meet the appraiser at the door and share with him some of the pertinent facts about the neighborhood and about our property in particular. So I did this, and a couple of days later, my mother came back to me and she said, okay, the house appraised, we're moving forward with a loan. But the appraiser in me was curious as to what the appraised value was. And when she told me, I knew that that value was incorrect. And that wasn't me speaking as a disgruntled homeowner who was upset that the house wasn't worth enough for the loan to go through. This was actually me speaking as an appraiser. So I submitted a reconsideration of value, which is really an appraisal rebuttal. And I submitted this on behalf of my parents, and the appraiser agreed with me. And so he increased his value estimate by $100,000. So my parents and I don't know for certain what the cause of this devaluation was, but it is our belief that it is due to racial bias. Most real estate appraisers are white, most are male, and most are at or near retirement age. And so in order to become an appraiser, you first have to start out as an appraiser trainee. And a trainee has to do two things. Number one, they have to take their qualifying education courses. And number two, they need to sign up with a supervisory appraiser who is willing to teach them the ropes and also sign off on their appraisal reports. So a trainee cannot complete an appraisal report for mortgage lending purposes unless they have the supervisor. So I invite everyone to look at the qualifying education courses kind of as a funnel. And so most of the classes are pretty homogenous. There is a smattering of people of color. However, once a qualifying education is done and it's up to the appraiser to find a supervisor, finding supervisors is difficult for all trainees, but I think it's more difficult for people of color because this is a kind of industry that's passed down through the generations, often from grandfather to father and from father to son. So when it comes time to find a supervisor, a lot of times it's those people who have family members in the business who get paired up with supervisors. And so if you roll this out on a macro scale, what ends up happening is the appraiser population community becomes more homogenous as the years pass. And all of the diversity and color gets stuck in the qualifying education pipeline. So it's my belief that one solution to racial bias in appraising is by creating a more diverse appraiser population that's representative of the communities that are being served. Better.com is doing this by actively pairing trainees of color with supervisors so that they don't get stuck in the qualifying education pipeline. The Appraisal Foundation is doing something in the form of PREA, which stands for Practical Application of Real Estate Appraisal, and it allows a trainee to completely bypass the need of a supervisor. And so go from trainee, taking some additional coursework that has a real emphasis on experiential learning, and then becoming licensed or certified. But the final step is something that's still a work in progress, and that is having more investors who participate in the secondary mortgage market accept appraisals completed by trainees. Right now, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac both accept loans that have appraisals that were completed by trainees, but there aren't many other investors who are willing to do so. And so then what that does is place a cap on how many appraisal reports can be completed by these trainees because when it comes time to sell the loan, there aren't as many buyers out there for it. So if that can be loosened up and more investors are willing to accept loans that have appraisals completed by trainees, it will go a very long way to debottlenecking a lot of the diverse talent that is stuck in the qualifying education layer, and also will go a long way towards addressing appraisal bias. Go a long way towards addressing appraisal bias. So that concludes my testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing so much information and also your personal story. That was pretty heartbreaking. Your parents feeling like they would need to erase themselves from their own home. Morgan Williams, are you there and connected? Are you there?
Hello, this is Morgan Williams. I am so sorry to report a technical issue that literally transpired a minute ago. I'm restarting my computer. Perhaps
we can
another speaker could go. Thank you so much.
No problem. Ira Goldstein, are you there and connected?
I am, but in actuality, I think Professor Squires was going to speak before me.
Okay. I had you, but we could move on. Professor Squires, are you there and connected?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Yes, my name is Gregory Squires. I'm a professor of sociology and public policy and public administration at George Washington University, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ira Goldstein, who is the president of the Policy Solutions Group at Reinvestment Fund. And we want to thank you for inviting us to be part of this conversation and to testify on resolution number 210208. We have supplied a written statement for the record, which we will highlight in a few moments this morning. Let me begin by noting that we're here today because there have been a lot of recent reports of anecdotes, as you've already indicated, of appraisal bias, and they become quite newsworthy. But there is nothing new about this. Biased appraisals have long been part of the housing market in the United States, and it's important to understand the extent of this history to understand where we are today. Now, I'm going to set the stage by sort of placing the appraisal issue in the larger context of historical and contemporary housing discrimination, and then Ira is going to talk a bit about the appraisal industry particularly and what we might do to create more accurate appraisals and a fair housing market. But let me begin by saying I think Joe Biden pretty much captured the key issues in his memorandum on redressing our nation's and the federal government's history of discriminatory housing policies about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And he said, let me quote, "During the 20th century, federal, state, and local governments systematically implemented racially discriminatory housing policies that contributed to segregated neighborhoods and inhibited equal opportunity and the chance to build wealth for Blacks, Latino, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders and Native American families and other underserved communities. Ongoing legacies of residential segregation and discrimination remain ever present. These include a racial gap in homeownership and a persistent undervaluation of properties owned by families of color." Now, accurate appraisals are critical. For the buyer, the appraisal represents what is presumed to be the fair and objective value of the purchase they are making. To the seller, it enables them to get a fair price for their property. For homeowners seeking to refinance, it unlocks an ability to capture equity in their homes. For lenders, they can be assured the home is ample collateral for the loan. Now, undervaluing of homes in non-white neighborhoods is a long-standing feature of our housing markets. And several factors have contributed to this, the federal government being a critical one. The early underwriting rules of the Federal Housing Administration and other federal agencies virtually excluded non-whites from participating in housing programs. Those underwriting guidelines read in part, and I quote, "If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. A change in social or racial occupancy generally contributes to instability and a decline in values," unquote. Real estate agents followed. Up until 1950, the National Association of Realtors had the following statement in its code of ethics, quote, "A realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of property or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individual whose presence will be detrimental to property values in their neighborhood," unquote. In addition to this, we had cities that enacted zoning laws that prohibited people of color from living in neighborhoods that were occupied by whites. There's a long history and contemporary reality of redlining by banks and insurance companies. There were racially restrictive covenants up until 1948 in which the buyer would agree when they sold that they would not sell their home to anyone other than a white person. Enforceability of these covenants was prohibited by the 1948 Supreme Court decision of Shelley versus Kramer. These deeds haven't disappeared, but the enforceability has. So today, notwithstanding the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and its significant amendments in 1988, there are still a variety of discriminatory practices in real estate industry that impact the racial gap in home values. Moreover, conscious and unconscious bias of homeowners and renters also play a role. Now, one consequence of this discrimination is that there are wide disparities in home ownership rates, which leads to wide disparities in wealth accumulation. Today, approximately 72% of white families own their homes compared to 42% of Black families and 48% of Latino families. Not only are these home ownership rates different, but the value of homes are different. People of color get into home ownership later in life. Their homes are valued less. They appreciate more slowly. The end result is they accumulate less equity and less value from home ownership. Just last week, Redfin released a study of more than 7.3 million home sales between 2013 and February of 2021, showing that comparable homes in Black and white areas are valued $46,000 less in Black areas. Philadelphia's undervaluation was estimated to be $25,600, approximately a 27% undervaluation. Today, the typical white family has about 10 times the wealth of the typical Black or brown family, and much of this disparity can be accounted for by differences in the equity that's accumulated from home ownership. Now, among the discriminatory practices cited by Joe Biden was the role of the appraisal industry in undervaluing homes. But it's important to understand that there are many different ways of valuing homes, of valuing homes. Appraisal is just one. There are census surveys, which are based on individual self-assessment of property valuation. And much of the recent research that has gotten so much news recently about so-called appraisals, in fact, is based on the census survey and is really not about appraisals. Tax assessments are another form of valuation. Real estate agents often rely on their own experience and recent home sales that they're familiar with to develop home values. And there are automated valuation models that apply a black box algorithm to estimate a home's value. Appraisals, therefore, are one of many approaches to determining property values, but they're an important one. And the appraisal industry has its own problematic history. Up until the 1970s, training materials used by the American Institute of Appraisers included the following example to illustrate neighborhood analysis. Quote, "The neighborhood is entirely Caucasian. It appears that there is no evidence, no adverse effect by minority groups. Racial bias has long crept into the appraisal process." Again, this is a long-standing practice. So while there is substantial evidence, systematic evidence of racial and ethnic bias in evaluation of properties, again, as already was indicated, the evidence on appraisals is really much more anecdotal. And we heard one compelling story from Ms. White. There are many other stories. There was a story reported in the New York Times recently about a family that had a similar situation. They got 2,000 messages from Facebook from families saying that they had the exact same experience. So this is anecdotal, but there's an awful lot of anecdotes out there. This can't be dismissed as just the occasional bad apple. At the same time, we don't have the systematic evidence that we have, for example, in mortgage lending bias, in racial steering, and other forms of discrimination in housing generally. Let me just add my own little anecdote, and this is one of many, many thousands. I teach a lot of courses on race. And about 20 years ago, I was selling a home, and in the process of selling it, the real estate agent asked me to remove from my bookshelf all the books that had to do with race. And for the same reasons that Ms. White indicated that other families have been given advice on how to, as I would put it, whiten their homes for the appraisal and sale process. So with this, I guess I've been practicing the AOP that we want to move away from, but that's only because my partner, Ira, is going to talk a little more about the specific practices of appraisals and offer recommendations that we both have developed on what might be done about this. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ira.
Wonderful. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Yes, my name is Ira Goldstein. And thank you, Madam Chair and Majority Leader, for holding these important hearings that we think are going to address, finally, a longstanding and important problem. I pick up from where my partner Greg left off. Several explanations have been offered for appraisal bias. In estimating a property's value, an appraiser typically selects 3 comps, or comparable properties. Comps are recent sales of similar properties within a given distance of the property being valued. There are often multiple usable comps, and the appraiser could select the lower valued sales, yielding a lower appraised value. Then there are adjustments for the differences between the comp and the property being valued. For example, the differences could be size or amenities or condition. And while there are condition guidelines for adjustments, those adjustments can make a difference in the value. Accordingly, there are these subjective elements of an objective process, which consciously or unconsciously can be influenced by appraisal bias. And even where appropriate comps are selected, the impact of historical discriminatory practices is essentially baked into current property values, thus perpetuating the impact of previous discrimination to current times. Another possible source of bias is that an appraiser may be from a different neighborhood and of a different race or ethnicity than the person whose home is being appraised, and therefore may be unfamiliar with homes in that neighborhood. A subject matter expert that we interviewed on this topic, who is a Black real estate broker in Philadelphia, shared her experience of a homeowner in Yorktown who received a very low appraisal, which was ultimately successfully appealed because the comps were not derived from that very unique enclave within North Philadelphia. And because the appraiser was unfamiliar with that neighborhood, that Yorktown, that enclave, that appraiser wasn't able to produce an accurate appraisal. The racial and ethnic composition of the appraisal industry is one factor that has received little attention, but this is an industry in which the overwhelming proportion of professionals are white. The Appraisal Institute reports in 2018, 85.4% of appraisers were white. The Philadelphia region is even more unbalanced. Here, 95% of appraisers and assessors are white, not Hispanic, and 5% are Black or brown. That compares to 22% Black or brown in real estate and 32% in banking. In recent years, the real estate and lending industries have recognized the importance of a diverse workforce. Last year, the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services concluded that a diverse workforce increases profitability, enhances employee engagement and innovation, and is associated with firm growth and market share. Diversity is a win-win for consumers and the industry alike. Ironically, there have been periods in recent history during which appraisals of homes in non-white areas were sometimes problematic because of systematic overvaluation. When subprime lending leading to the foreclosure crisis was peaking, overvaluation, some of which rose to the level of appraisal fraud, was widespread. And just before the housing bubble burst, 90% of appraisers in a national survey reported that they were pressured by real estate agents, lenders, and consumers to increase their valuations. In many cases, appraisers did meet the numbers so the deals could go through, only to result in foreclosure a few years later. But a common element in both the under and overappraisal phenomena is that these practices were concentrated in minority neighborhoods. And as Ms. White testified, the industry is becoming activated on the issue of engagement, so we don't need to say more about that. But more can be done. So HUD and other fair housing authorities should conduct systematic testing audits similar to the nationwide housing discrimination studies conducted by the Urban Institute to determine just how frequently the story of Abina and Alex Horton plays out. It's also time to replicate some studies done by the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank, and lenders could seek out local appraisers who are more familiar with traditionally underserved communities. But aggressive efforts should be undertaken to substantially increase employment of racial and ethnic minorities in this industry. In those cases where appraisal firms consistently engage in practices that make that more difficult, and they refuse to take corrective actions, sanctions could include fines, and in particularly egregious cases, terminating license or prohibiting from engaging in business. More attention should also be given to the qualifications and experience necessary to become an appraiser. Appraisal licensing in Pennsylvania is a function of the State Board of Certified Real Estate Appraisers, and its standards are based on federal standards. In recent years, some changes have been made in Pennsylvania, but more may be necessary. Professional requirements, for example, 1,250 hours of training doing actual residential appraisals, training with a supervisory appraiser with qualifications exceeding the federal standard, those things that make it difficult for people of color to become appraisers, for which there is no demonstrable connection to creating solid appraisers, should be considered for amendment or elimination. And here we think about the business of the city of Philadelphia. In its various functions, they require the use of appraisers. For example, every one of the more than 2,700 home buyers under the city's extremely successful Philly First Home program required a property appraisal. The city could, as it does in other contracting activity, incent use of appraisers who are people of color. It could similarly incent appraisers who are white to provide the training opportunities to appraisers of color who need those opportunities to gain certification. The field training obligation is mentioned by real estate professionals as an impediment to appraisers who are people of color. And the city is a big purchaser of services, and it would not be unprecedented to exercise that economic power to address an inequality. In conclusion, all parties engaged in real estate transactions benefit from accurate appraisals. This is one policy arena where interests that often are at odds with each other can come together for their mutual benefit and the benefit of communities throughout the nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that testimony. Morgan Williams, are you doing better with the technology?
Yes, I have a different audio than my video just to ensure that my audio is smooth, but I'm here with you. Can you hear me fine?
Yep, sounds great. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhoods and Development, Housing, Neighborhood Development and the Homeless. My name is Morgan Williams. I'm here to testify on Resolution 210208. I'm pleased to speak on behalf of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Founded in 1988, NAFA is a DC-based consortium of private nonprofit fair housing organizations and state and local civil rights agencies from throughout the United States. Our education, advocacy, community development, member services, research, and enforcement programs help to provide and ensure fair access to housing and financial services. We have two really wonderful partner organizations in the Philadelphia region. Angela McIver is the CEO of the Fair Housing Rights Center, and Rachel Wentworth is the ED of the Housing Equality Center, and they're both tremendous resources on fair housing and fair lending issues generally. It's great to be here with the fellow speakers and witnesses to provide this testimony. I'm actually glad for the technical issues because some of my remarks were going to, I think, overlap with what Professor Squires and Mr. Goldstein remarked on, and I always appreciate opportunities to hear from Jillian and appreciate the work and leadership that she provides in this space. My written testimony does kind of track to some of what has been covered, and so I will breeze through a couple of points and just reiterate a few things on some recommendations for solutions or ways to move forward. I did want to note, as Professor Squires did, the backdrop of explicit racial valuation policies and the extent to which homes in neighborhoods with similar amenities were undervalued on the basis of race, and that this is the backdrop that we live in and in which appraisers work. And the national reckoning with systemic racism is something that I think we are unpacking in the housing industry market by market. And when you look at the appraisal industry, you have to start with the redlining maps. I think that there's a chat feature here. If I will just run it. That makes sense. And of course, not only are native historic nations, but what in noted 2016 black households are $30,000 as well. Median white households, and that's specifically from these practices. Black and low can result in distortion in the valuation and cancel on sales tax contract financiers. Low appraisal is using home based on appraisal of the mortgages and foreclosure prices, and this reform package community color were much affected with this subprime loan and this overvaluation appraisal practice, and ultimately involved further stripping of wealth from communities of color. And there's been great mention of the anecdotes of discrimination. There's just three quick studies that I wanted to point to and underscore that show the systemic nature of this. A 2018 Brookings Institution study that found that homes in a majority of black neighborhoods were appraised for 23% less than properties in mostly white neighborhoods, even after controlling for home features and neighborhood amenities. A 2020 study that found that neighborhood racial composition was even a stronger determinant of a home's appraised value in 2015 than it had been in 1980. So this is over the period of, the Fair Housing Act being in operation. Researchers found that the race appraisal gap had in fact doubled since 1980. And then a third study, just to show the systemic nature of this, drive that home a little further. Again, 2020 study found that automated valuation models, AVMs, in majority black neighborhoods produced a larger percentage magnitude of inaccuracies relative to the underlying sales prices than AVMs in majority white neighborhoods, which is just another showing of the systemic nature of this anecdotal issue. And I want to shift gears to briefly remark on action steps. We applaud the City of Philadelphia's initiative in soliciting information through these hearings. And I just want to build on a couple of the remarks that some of the co-presenters made on this. Jillian spoke about alternative avenues for licensing and trainee engagement. And I think generally we want to just sort of underscore that Philadelphia should promote diversity in the appraisal industry. I'm not sure if this is one of the programs specifically that Jillian was referencing, but the National Urban League, the Appraisal Institute, and Fannie Mae have started an appraisal diversity initiative, which, among other things, has awarded scholarships to try to create a more diverse pipeline. And similarly, the House Financial Services Committee just passed a bill to create a grant program to bolster diversity. The Real Estate Valuation Fairness and Improvement Act, HR 2553, would require a review of federal appraisal standards and recommended reforms to prevent disparate impacts on the valuation of homes in communities of color and those owned by people of color. And the bill would also create a grant program administered by the appraisal subcommittee to support a diverse pipeline of professional appraisals. And perhaps in tandem with these programs, the city could consider a local grant program and other local programs to promote diversity in the industry. Professor Squires remarked on alternative approaches to establishing property values regarding census surveys and tax assessments. And one of the things that advocates have raised is whether cost analysis appraisals may be a more viable means of approaching non-discriminatory appraisal practices. And we would suggest that Philadelphia should engage federal and state regulators to promote alternative appraisal approaches that are less subject to bias. And, some have questioned the efficacy of the predominant use of the sales comparison approach, leading to suggestions that a switch to the cost analysis approach might yield more equitable outcomes. And there's federal and state regulators that could be engaged on this. This could be conducted in tandem with the national review of appraisal standards called for in the House Appraisal Bias Bill. A third point of my five, just to keep everyone oriented, I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible. And my list may have grown having heard from my other speakers. But neighborhood investment reporting. So this is where the city has specific information that may be used strategically to educate appraisers. So the city has information both about its own investments in communities as well as neighborhoods within the city that have problems with underappraisals. So it may also know about private investments that it's encouraging or coordinating or leveraging and supporting in some way. So this information may not be readily available to appraisers, and the city could look for ways to ensure that appraisers are aware of neighborhood investment activities that will likely impact property values through reports, neighborhood tours, webinars, and seminars. And there's a strategic way that that information could be targeted in a way that might help to address the problem of underappraisals. My third point here is just fair lending training, which isn't universally required on an ongoing basis in the appraisal industry. And Philadelphia should ensure that local appraisers receive ongoing fair lending training. There are bills that have been passed in New York and California recently to include fair lending training as a regular requirement for license renewal. And the city should ensure that state entities are similarly forwarding mandates to require fair lending training among appraisers. There's emphasis on research that has been noted by some of the other speakers, and I think that this is something that's sort of broadly needed. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to better understand appraisals and valuation models and how they impact communities of color. There was a call for systemic testing audits, and that's something that we at the National Fair Housing Alliance do as a great deal of investigations in the fair housing market and enforcement on the basis of that in coordination with local partners. And this is something that we're working on, and it's absolutely needed. HUD has engaged in this work in the past, and we would call upon HUD to coordinate efforts that target this issue and to support systemic investigations among private fair housing centers that are leading the way in investigating this issue. I guess I just wrap it up there and say just in conclusion that really the city of Philadelphia has numerous legal, supervisory, policy, and research tools that it can, evaluate and use to address potential discrimination in the appraisal system. And we appreciate the time you're taking to review this now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions, and then was going to go to Majority Leader Parker for comments and questions. So my first question is for Jillian White. You mentioned that having a more diverse appraiser population, and everyone mentioned that having a more diverse appraiser population is an important step in ending bias, and that the secondary market needs to accept trainee appraisers. What steps would need to be taken to have these trainees' appraisals accepted?
I think there needs to be an education of those in the secondary mortgage market to understand the lack of risk associated with accepting appraiser trainee reports. There's this misinformation going around. A lot of people believe that the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, don't accept it, which is not the case. And typically, they're kind of the gold standard in terms of what is acceptable. So educating them on the benefit of accepting appraiser trainee reports, I think would go a long way to making them feel more comfortable moving forward with appraisal.
Thank you. Next, Morgan, you talked about the idea of moving to a cost analysis model. Can you more fully explain what that means and how that differs from the current approach?
I can, but Jillian could do a much better job than I can. So I might actually, I can give a very broad overview of what I mean in general terms, but Jillian is a professional appraiser, so would definitely be one to field the question. But in general terms, because of including historic undervaluing of neighborhoods, using a cost to a similar valuation home approach locks in the undervaluing of those neighborhoods. When taking a cost approach, you're looking more at a more uniform standard that doesn't include those historic biases. But Jillian is a professional. I'll turn it over.
Morgan, I think you nailed it. I don't have much to add there, just that the sales comparison approach we know just propagates the aftermath of redlining. And so the cost approach is looking at the materials and the cost of the land and what would it cost somebody to build the house new, whereas the sales comparison approach is always taking a historical look at the property value. And the behavior of market players is really what that's measuring. But if the market has been suppressed by redlining, then you can't get equality through the sales comparison approach a lot.
Are there places or companies that use, how do we know which appraisers use which model?
So for mortgage lending transactions, all appraisers are using the sales comparison approach. That is the dominant approach to value. And also, it is not at the appraiser's discretion to determine what type of approach to value that they are using. That is dictated by the lenders, which in turn is dictated by the investors who are going to be buying these loans. So that would really have to be something that probably comes from the GS thing. Okay, we want to include an additional approach to value.
What levers do we have to get a change in the approach? What would we need to do to push for change?
That's a really good question. In years past, the cost approach was a part of every mortgage lending appraisal report, and then it got pulled out of the report a few years back. So probably the lever to pull would be through the FHFA, and then they can have these conversations with the GSEs. However, one thing I do want to call out, though, is a lot of appraisers don't know how to handle the cost approach appropriately, which is one of the reasons why it was pulled out in the first place. So I think additional approaches to value are definitely needed. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a matter of just trading one for the other. We kind of need a multifaceted approach so that they can each check.
Thank you. And then my last question.
And I would just briefly add to that to note that the FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is the under conservatorship, the agency that is overseeing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they did in February or so accept comments on appraisal issues, including appraisal bias. And our office did submit a comment letter, some of which was helpful in regards to some of my written testimony. But I would just say that that actually there's a fair lending agency associated with office that's newly created at FHFA, and I think that they would still welcome input on appraisal bias issues and would be happy to ensure that the right folks at the City of Philadelphia or otherwise associated with this committee could approach those lending folks in the context of the comments they recently received and input I'm sure they still welcome to hear.
Thank you.
It looks like my tech issues resumed, but I'm still joined by phone, so forgive me.
We heard you. Thank you so much. And that's a great suggestion. I'd love to assist Majority Leader Parker in giving further input to that process, and I'm sure other members of the committee would as well. And my last question is for Ira Goldstein and Professor Squires, whomever can answer it best. Are there ways for homeowners of color to file claims when they feel they've been discriminated against?
Well, Ira is a former HUD enforcement official, so I think he should go first on this one.
Sure. So if somebody gets an appraisal that they don't think is right, they do have a potential to appeal that appraisal, and there are, processes for doing that. Oftentimes, the person who is getting the mortgage, the buyer, is paying for that appraisal, but they don't actually realize that they bought and paid for that. It's their document. They can have it. They can see it. They can review it, and they can appeal it. When we used to get complaints in HUD about the potential of race discrimination in appraisal, typically what I would do is have those appraisals reviewed by a senior, very experienced review appraiser to identify whether or not that there were issues that sort of immediately jumped out. And then secondarily, in cases where there were some apparent issues, I would go and have blind appraisals done and compare them and figure out what the problems were with those appraisals. But the short answer to your question is yes, somebody can appeal their appraisal and then potentially get that value changed.
Yeah, could I chime in on a related suggestion that just occurred to me in listening to everybody? We indicated in our statement that the City of Philadelphia, nonprofits, universities, churches could make a statement by identifying those appraisers who are doing a good job, perhaps working with the Realtors Association, and making a statement. But what we didn't recommend, it just occurred to me, is perhaps some kind of partnership or coalition could be organized quite publicly, where representatives of each of these different sectors could get together, issue some kind of statement as to what their goal is, and proceed. This doesn't require passing a law. It doesn't require going to court necessarily, but it means making much more of a public issue than this has been. And if you get various churches and various universities and various jurisdictions together, you can bring a variety of segments of your community together on an issue that they all stand to gain by.
Thank you for that suggestion.
And if I may, this is Morgan, just very briefly, Morgan Williams, on the question of a complaint of discrimination in regards to appraisal specifically. I just wanted to underscore that the two local offices that I flagged that are doing fair housing investigations and enforcement work, the Fair Housing Rights Center and the Housing Equality Center, are two fantastic local offices that complainants can contact to pursue investigations of this issue.
Great. Thank you so much. That's valuable information. Now we'll go to Majority Leader Parker for questions and comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me start by thanking you, Jillian, Morgan, Ira, and Professor Squires for your testimony. First, let me start here. And I want to start where you just left off, Professor Squires. Madam Chair, we are going to form here in City Council a Philadelphia, elimination of racial bias in the appraisal industry work group. So all of the sponsors who sponsored this resolution and our teams can do exactly what Professor Squires just said, that is form a work group where, Professor Squires, what we want to do is we want to identify where we can use our influence and leverage in City Council. One, to encourage the passage of federal legislation that you all indicated is now in the works. So we want to affirmatively support that, which is already, moving its way through the pipeline. But in all of the very specific solutions that you all proffered in your testimony, what of that has to occur at the federal, at the state, and at the local level? And then whatever we need to do here at the local level, Madam Chair, we'll count on you along with all other members who supported the resolution to see how we can break it up so that when we in council speak on this issue, we do so in a very unified manner, and we will be accepting the recommendation that encourages us to bring the Philadelphia Federal Reserve to the table with us, along with the real estate industry, right? Because part of it is that we all need to be sitting at the table together to figure out what we can do that requires legislation, and some of it just requires communication. With that being said, Jillian, I know you had to go. Are you still with us, Jillian? Because I wanted you to explain something for the benefit of the public.
I'm still here. Yes.
Okay, Jillian, for the viewing public who is home, who is watching this hearing, explain the difference between appraisals and assessments, right? And how one might, in essence, influence the other, appraisals and assessments.
Okay. Well, a real estate appraisal, by definition, is an opinion of value. There's a number of reasons why somebody might get their home appraised, but what we're talking about mainly is about mortgage lending appraisals. So you're in need of financing. The appraiser goes in and takes a look at the property and attaches an opinion of value to it. Assessments are created based off of in what way or by how much is your home going to be taxed. And so per my understanding with assessments, that's done on the mass level. Nobody's actually physically going into the property or dealing with it on an individual basis. It's more of macro data in aggregate in order to assess what the taxable amount of the home would be. Whereas with the appraisal, it's always very individualized. And again, there are lots of reasons for appraisal, but most often they are completed for mortgage lending transaction.
Could I comment here? I mean, I've learned so much from listening to Ms. White twice, and this is just another great example. But it's also important to understand that the issue with tax assessments is that homes in non-white neighborhoods have actually been overassessed. Homes in white neighborhoods have been underassessed. So people in non-white neighborhoods are paying more than their fair share of taxes. People in white neighborhoods are paying less. So low-income folks, people in non-white areas, are paying more and getting less out of public schools and other public services. Residents of white, middle-income, upper-income neighborhoods are paying less than their fair share and getting more in the way of public schools and other public services. And this is another issue that you sort of have to delve into the weeds a little bit, but there is a lot of research over a long period of time with problems in tax assessments. And people can appeal, and people do appeal, but I believe, and maybe Ira can correct me on this, the people who have successfully appealed their tax assessments are more likely people who are middle and upper income folks who have the time, the ability, and can hire the help they need to file those assessments. So don't be misled by the fact that tax assessments may be higher in non-white neighborhoods and lower in white neighborhoods than they should be.
Professor Squires, let me just interject here and say thank you. You delved into the next question I had. So one thing I'm trying to understand, and this is for the benefit of the viewing public at home, who is actually really like many council members who we don't do this for a living, right? So we don't perform appraisals, nor are we directly responsible for assessments. But one thing is clear by your testimony. Black folks seem to be, and I want you to please excuse my language here, getting screwed when it comes to appraisals, but also screwed when it comes to assessments, okay? And so while this hearing is exploring how Black homeowners often face low appraisals, potentially due to, systemic racism, on the other side of the coin, low-income neighborhoods, as you just heard from Professor Squires, which often tend to be non-white, are often over-assessed, resulting in homeowners who are overpaying on their property taxes. And I want to state for the record, because I know member Whip Squilla is on. And this is something that has been extremely important to both he, along with Council Member Johnson. My question specifically to you, Professor Squires and Ira, is how can both of these things be true? In other words, how can Black homeowners face both appraisals that are too low, but on the other hand, assessments that are just too high? They're being overassessed. People who are watching are saying, I don't understand this. Explain it to us, if you will.
Well, I'll take a first shot of it. I mean, I don't have a clear categorical answer, but part of it, I think, is when it comes to low-income neighborhoods generally and neighborhoods of color, these are areas that professionals are less familiar with. And as Ms. White indicated, you're not going inside a home to do the assessment. And so you get these quick and dirty assessments. There's reason to believe that they won't be challenged. There is a history of seeing challenged assessments in white neighborhoods, so there may be more care taken to try to make sure that you don't over-assess in the white neighborhoods. But what links this together, I think, is conscious and unconscious bias that has worked against low-income neighborhoods forever. It's kind of like, the same neighborhoods that had been redlined forever were victimized by reverse redlining when predatory lending came on board. Lenders knew exactly who they hadn't been serving and who was vulnerable to a predatory loan. So it was easy for them to find people and neighborhoods that they could flood with subprime predatory products.
Ira, any comments?
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple other things, and I agree with everything that Greg has said. I think that there is, and if you sort of think about municipalities across the country, the data upon which assessors work is oftentimes far less than perfect, far less than contemporary. Whereas, as Ms. White said, an assessment is a highly tailored, very sort of hands-on, not mass exercise. It's a one property at a time exercise. But I do think that, there are other issues around the extent to which people are familiar with neighborhoods. And lastly, I think it's important for communities that are thinking about the assessment issue in general, but the appraisals as well, is, are you taking a look at whether or not whatever you come up with a value, be it for an assessment or an appraisal, whether or not it's accurate and not connected to the racial composition of the neighborhood within which the property is located. Doing that kind of ongoing, intensive, careful, fair housing monitoring, if you will, of this exercise could really go quite far in terms of figuring out whether or not evaluations are done fairly and equitably.
Thank you for your response there, Ira. I also wanted to note for the record that reference to Philly First are widely used and extremely popular and successful closing costs and down payment assistance of up to $10,000 that Philadelphia instituted, strongly advocated for by Councilmember Mark Squilla, myself, and several others. We will, now that you've given us this direction, we will figure out a way of how we use the leverage of our program, which I want to state for the record will be refunded. Thanks to the leadership of our City Council President, Darrell Clark. We passed our Neighborhood Preservation Initiative, in essence, that will secure $400 million, $100 million for 4 years to make an investment in these of the very programs that you mentioned. So we will definitely be looking at that. But in addition, Ira, I'm going to ask you to go back, because for Philadelphia homeowners and even renters, this is extremely important for those of you who are viewing at home. In the midst of this pandemic, we as a council, led by council members Gautier and Gim and Sanchez and Brooks and so many others, have done everything that we can to ensure that renters in the city of Philadelphia are protected. But we want to also sound the alarm to tell you that high rate of home ownership that Philadelphia was often able to boast about, even with the significant amount of poverty that we had, and that home ownership was in Black and brown communities, we are now basically level between the amount of homeowners and the amount of renters. And in no way, shape, or form are we content with that. We want you to own. So what we're talking about now is, how do we peel back the layers and remove every barrier to access to ownership? And then when you do own, allowing you to build wealth and gain equity, in the midst of that process. And it's with that in mind, Ira, when I listen to Professor Squires, I'm going back and he's talking about those subprime, mortgages, and that, the industry knew where it was going when it was targeted. And we keep using the term predatory lending. And again, for the sake of the viewing public, what does that mean? Most people couldn't go to the prime market to get a loan. They had to go to the subprime market where because their credit could have been less than perfect. But when they went there, the fees, were exorbitant. The interest rates were exorbitant. They had these, balloon payments that were required, at the end, and they lent to people without regards to their ability to repay. And I'm telling you, so many people lost their homes or went under water. Ira, another area that we've talked about is reverse mortgages. TRF did the study for council when I got here. Thank you, Council President Darrell Clark, for your assistance there. How do reverse mortgages fit into this conversation, particularly as it relates to that overvaluation that I think it was Morgan, he spoke about?
Sure. Yeah. With reverse mortgages, you're talking about a product that's typically insured by HUD or the Federal Housing Administration, and it's made available to people who are 62 years of age or older. Generally speaking, these are loans that are designed to unlock the equity that you have in your home. And as you reach an age towards retirement where your income may be beginning to go down, to be able to sort of take that home and turn it into a cash flow or a slug of money to get something done. The amount of money that you can get under a reverse mortgage is a function of your age. It's a function of the value of your home. It's a function of interest rates and fees. And now, gratefully, to a change in HUD regulations, it's a function of your ability to pay your ongoing bills for taxes and insurance. The study that we did at your behest, Majority Leader, we interviewed in great detail a number of people who had reverse mortgages who went to foreclosure. And you would think that, how could that be when folks like Tom Selleck or the Fonz or other luminaries tell you, we pay you to stay in your home. How could you actually lose your home? Well, in fact, they do. People do occasionally lose their home. And one of the things that we identified there in those cases that went to foreclosure was vast overvaluation. And that was done because the people who were selling those mortgages to the people who got those mortgages really didn't care that much about anything other than making the transaction work. But I remember going out to one home in the North Philly neighborhood, and we had a very detailed interview with the person. It had to have been valued 4 to 5 times what the actual value of that home was. And in the end, it went to foreclosure. And in the end, the family lost the home. And in the end, the public was stuck with the insurance claim, basically because the mortgages are FHA insured. So as Ms. White and Greg and all of us have said so far, accurate appraisals are so vitally important because at the end of the day, that is the collateral for a loan. And getting the right amount is so important.
Thank you for your comments and testimony. I know this is pretty frustrating for people who are watching it at home because I know it's frustrating for my colleagues and I. And I don't care how you look at what we're discussing here. If we're talking about the racial bias in the appraisal industry, if we're talking about predatory, lending and mortgages or the payday loans, the little brother that we also fought when we were in Harrisburg, in every way, shape, or form, we see systemic efforts to zap equity, ownership, and generational wealth from Black communities, those that least have it. And so I would argue to you, if anybody is thinking that there's one thing that we can do, that there's a silver bullet, Madam Chairwoman Gautier, it's like when we're talking about gun violence. There is just no one silver bullet, one thing that we can do. It's so complex. There are so many layers and so much work that we need to do to address this issue. But I will commit to each of you today that we want to make a formal ask. Here I go. I'm always asking for something. We're going to ask each and every one of you, Jillian, Morgan, Ira, and Gregory, if you would be a formal part of this work group that we will be putting together in City Council to help us, one, categorize the recommended solutions that you have proposed so that, not just Sherelle Parker, but Madam Chairwoman Gautier and all members of this committee who sponsored this legislation, we can all play a role in helping to protect the people of Philadelphia, in this area. So I just want to say thank you again for your testimony. And Madam Chairwoman, thank you so very much for the leeway provided today.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to participating in the work group. That's very exciting. Are there any other questions or comments for this panel from members of the committee? Okay. There being none, Ms. Sherrills, will you please call the next panel or witness to testify?
Yes. Panel 2, Michael Cunningham, John Russell, Mark Alston, Carlo Batts, and Annette Collier.
Okay. Michael Cunningham, are you there and connected?
I am. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Good morning, Chairman Gaudier and members of the Committee on Housing and Neighborhood Development and the Homeless. I would like to thank Councilwoman Sherelle Parker for the invitation and Ken Weinstein for the connection and suggestion that I invite the national officers of the American Society of Appraisers to today's hearing. My name is Michael Cunningham. I'm here to testify on Resolution 210-208. By way of background, I'm a board officer for the Philadelphia chapter of the American Society of Appraisers. I've been involved with the American Society of Appraisers for roughly 14 years, and I've been a member of the Philadelphia board for the past 5 years. It's worth noting that I've been involved in Philadelphia civic life for probably 20 years. If many of you on city council actually know me. The American Society of Appraisers is the second largest member organization representing appraisers in the United States. The ASA is a multidisciplinary organization with appraisal specialists in business, machinery and equipment, and personal property such as antiques or fine art. Although I am now a commercial real estate appraiser, I worked as a business appraiser for more than a decade, and I was able to make the transition to being a commercial real estate appraiser due to relationships I built as a member of the ASA. It is important to note that only a handful of local ASA active members are real estate appraisers. And indeed, to my knowledge, I am one of only 2 ASA members and real property appraisers who both live and work in the city of Philadelphia. I am acquainted with 2 real estate appraisal trainees that live and work in Philadelphia, but I suspect that the number of real estate appraisers who live in Philadelphia is small. Given that the number of ASA real estate appraisers in the city of Philadelphia is relatively limited, I cannot speak for my profession as a whole. Nonetheless, on behalf of myself, I understand the concerns regarding appraisal bias, and I'm deeply committed to providing the opportunity for a more diverse pool of candidates within the industry. I hope that I can have my own appraisal trainees in a few years, and candidate diversity will most certainly be considered in the selection process. Just by way of background, right now, in order to be a mentor in this industry, you have to have 5 years of experience, and I only have 3 years of experience. There's a rumor that the state of Pennsylvania will reduce the time required to be a professional mentor from 5 years to 3 years. This is a change that I would support, since it would increase the availability of mentors for individuals, from individuals who have recently entered the profession. And getting mentors is really a critical piece, and we have to be mindful of that. I know that the concerns that lead to today's hearing about the appraisal industry focus on serious challenges. I also want to note, however, that there is significant opportunity. The median age of ASA members is approaching retirement age, and this is true for the real estate profession, appraisal profession as a whole. Recruiting and training new real estate property appraisers is thus in the interest of our profession. This is kind of a side note before I introduce John Russell from the National ASA. I just wanted to note that the Office of Property Assessment for the City of Philadelphia has 200 to 300 employees. To the extent that OPA can provide internships to college students, that may be one way for the city to increase exposure to concepts in real estate appraising, since the appraisal and the assessment process for real property is very similar, although there are differences. simply increasing the number of individuals familiar with the real estate appraisal and assessor professions would likely assist in diversifying the profession and also strengthen the work of OPA. As we all know, the work of OPA needs to be improved. The ASA, the American Society of Appraisers, has many classes and courses that are available, and OPA staff is invited to avail themselves of our resources and experience. I yield the balance of my time to John Russell, who is the Strategic Professorship Officer from the National Associate Offices of the American Society of Appraisers. Both Councilwoman Gaudier and Councilwoman Parker have my contact information for further, if they need to reach me in the future.
On first question, right?
Yeah, I'm here 100%. Of course.
Great. John Russell, are you there and connected?
Yes, good morning, Chairwoman Gauthier. Glad to join you all this morning.
Good to have you. Please state your name for the record and proceed with the testimony.
Absolutely. My name is John Russell, and I'm the Strategic Partnership Officer for the American Society of Appraisers, or ASA. And again, Chairwoman Gauthier and members of the Committee Housing, Neighborhood Development, and Homeless, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to participate in this important conversation. I'm here to testify in Resolution 210-208. ASA appreciates this opportunity because we are committed both to fully understanding what contributes to devaluation of homes in minority communities and to developing long-term solutions that address the issue. We agree with the premise that devaluation has and continues to occur in minority neighborhoods, and this problem, as we've heard today, has roots dating back to the 1930s and government-backed redlining, and this has continued into the 21st century. We also believe the problem isn't singular. We heard reference that there's no silver bullet, but it's driven instead by several factors. Addressing the devaluation of homes in minority neighborhoods requires untangling the threads of the problem so each is better understood and can be addressed with the right legislative, regulatory, or policy solution. I'm going to focus on what we see as two primary drivers for continued devaluation today. First, as we've talked about a little bit, the over-reliance on the sales comparison approach to value, and second, the impact of unconscious bias on the appraisal profession. On the sales comparison approach, it helps to understand how all three approaches to determining value operate. We've talked a little bit about the cost approach already, but at a high level, you look at what the cost would be to acquire land and build a comparable home, similar condition, quality, and you adjust for age, you depreciate the property to understand what it would cost today to have a similar home. You also have the income approach, which looks toward what a home would rent for. And this approach is forward-looking, determining value based on the expected rental returns. So this leaves the sales comparison approach, which relies on historical sales data to help inform the present value of a home. This approach, as we've discussed, is retrospective in nature, and as we'll discuss shortly, has aspects that can contribute to devaluation. Now, typically, an appraiser would use each of these three approaches to value, and based on their experience and the information they have, weight them accordingly, and reconcile them to determine an opinion of value. Unfortunately, modern mortgage financing practices are overwhelmingly reliant on the sales comparison approach to support the opinion of value. As we've discussed a little bit today, the two largest government-sponsored secondary mortgage market participants, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they're the primary drivers in this, and they've built their collateral decision engines around sales comparison data. Internal QC tools like Collateral Underwriter for Fannie Mae and Automated Collateral Evaluation for Freddie Mac use prior sales data and previous appraisals to determine whether the opinion of value on a subject property is credible. Data fields collected into these QC tools as part of prior sales and their related appraisals are checked against the appraisal to be used in connection with a mortgage to be sold to Fannie or Freddie, so a collateral risk score can be determined. This scoring establishes whether Fannie or Freddie will waive certain purchase conditions, such as warrant and representation repurchase requirements. The bulk of collateral lending decisions are predicated on sales comparison data. Whether a loan will be purchased by Fannie or Freddie and at what terms depends in large part on the sales comparison approach and the historical data it utilizes. This explains why mortgage lending appraisals are generally skewed toward the sales comparison approach, not because cost or income approach are somehow less reliable, but because the back-end tools used by the secondary market will focus on sales comparison approach in its data. Appraisers, therefore, as we heard earlier today, I believe Jillian talked about it, are led to produce appraisals that derive much of their basis, if not all, from sales comparison. Now, in minority neighborhoods where home values were depressed from the 1930s onwards, this can have the effect of carrying forward the initial devaluation caused by redlining into current values. Now, whether this is at the level of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac with their policies, or through federal legislation such as current House Resolution 2553, work must be done to rebalance how each approach contributes to the development of an opinion of value. Now, over-reliance on the sales comparison approach can explain some, but not all, of what contributes to devaluation in minority communities. Another significant factor is unconscious bias. Now, at the risk of oversimplifying this area of study, and I'm by no means an expert on it, unconscious bias is the application of a set of developed assumptions on a current situation. Consider it someone's lived experiences, the places they've gone, the people they've interacted with, the challenges they've encountered. As we age, our lived experience often informs a number of assumptions. These are not conscious decisions we make, but decisions that are wired into who we are. A simple analogy is driving a car. When we first start, the number of inputs we can all remember that go into driving are overwhelming. But over time and with experience, we learn when to accelerate and when to brake based on what we expect the others around us in traffic to do. The decisions that once required conscious thought are now ingrained. Often, these unconscious biases or assumptions are benign. However, when they meet at the intersection of homeownership and race, they can have particularly damaging effects. An appraiser going into a neighborhood whose characteristics and makeup vary from where they call home may reach negative conclusions about a community not through intent or observation, but through unconscious thought. Worth noting here that appraisers, like Michael, who just spoke before me, want to get each appraisal assignment right to the best of their ability. If the problem before us was bad actors intent on going into minority neighborhoods and actively discriminating, not only would it see universal condemnation, but the solution to the problem would be readily apparent. You'd kick the bad actors out of the appraisal profession. Appraisers treat their role as objective, impartial, and unbiased professionals very seriously. They do not seek to influence the outcome of an appraisal based on their own preferences or opinions, but on the underlying data and information of each assignment. However, they also may not be aware of how their lived experience may cause them to unconsciously view a property in a minority community as having a certain level of condition or quality, for example. Educating appraisers on the topic of unconscious bias, what it is, how to acknowledge it, and tools for confronting and overcoming it is a critical piece of any solution to the problem of devaluation. When given the right tools, appraisers will put them into practice so that even their unconscious biases do not affect their opinion of value. And this underscores something Jillian did a great job talking about earlier, and that's the need for greater diversity in the appraisal profession. At the same time as we work to equip appraisers so they can overcome unconscious bias, the profession must also work to bring in new practitioners with a range of lived experiences, be it race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or military service, just to name a few. The addition of diversity helps ensure the appraisal profession looks more like the communities it serves. What has been discussed may not, and frankly will not, cover everything that we need to do to address devaluation, but my hope is what has been discussed can help inform the ongoing conversation on this topic. I and ASA appreciate having the opportunity to appear today and look forward to any questions you may have today or in the future. Thank you so much for the time this morning.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mark Alston, are you there and connected?
I am here.
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Mark Alston. Good day, Chairman Gontier and members of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. Again, my name is Mark Alston. I'm the chairman of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB's Public Affairs Committee. The National Association of Real Estate Brokers was founded in 1947 by 12 black real estate brokers, 11 men and 1 woman in Tampa Bay, Florida, to address the needs, inequities, and status of black homeownership in the United States. I think it should be said that we were founded because blacks were not allowed at the time to be members of the National Association of Realtors. Blacks had come home from World War II to conditions that were worse than the ones for housing that they were in fighting for America's freedom. So we founded the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, and we are the watchmen for our community. Today, we have 90 chapters in 33 states, including the Philadelphia Metropolitan Board of Realtors, and our motto is democracy in housing. I also need to say that I'm a real estate broker. I own a mortgage company. I've been in this business for 32 years. I have practical experience. I have as a practitioner, and I have personal experience in having to remove all evidence of my living in a house to be able to sell it in the community that I lived in, and I'm the broker. I couldn't even sell my own house. Black American home ownership, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, fourth quarter 2020, is at 44.1%. Non-Hispanic white home ownership is at 74.5%. The resulting gap between black and white home ownership is 30.4%. This gap today is larger than it was in 1968 when the historic Fair Housing Act was passed. Opposition to and disparities in black home ownership opportunity are not strangers to black families. Opposition to actual targeted opposition designed to eliminate the opportunity for black families to grow wealth by buying appreciating assets as opposed to depreciating assets like cars are not strangers to black families. Exclusionary zoning, private covenants, which restricted the sale of property to blacks and other non-white buyers, federal government sanctioned redlining that we've heard about, which created mortgage deserts. In the redlining, if it was a green area, a new white subdivision, or a blue area, an old established white area, you could get an 85% loan, put 15% down. In the yellow areas that had as much as 1% black, that mortgage availability was eliminated, was down to 15%. You had to put 15, you could put 85% down and get a 15% mortgage. And of course, in the red areas where blacks lived, there were no mortgages available. Urban renewal, which destroyed traditional black neighborhoods. The Interstate Highway Act of 1959 bulldozed black homes using eminent domain and destroyed black neighborhoods. And of course, the appraisal practices that refuse to assign correct value to some of the country's most valuable real property. We had hoped that the 1989 Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, enacted to reform appraisal practices by implementing licensing requirements for appraisers, standardization of appraisal forms, and oversight by the Federal Financial Examination Council and its appraisal subcommittee, would lead to fair appraisal valuations in black neighborhoods. That was when the savings and loans crashed. And FIREA came around and established the real appraisals and appraisal licensing. Prior to that, appraisers were being hired off the street, filling out index cards, valuing property. Loans were being made based on the credit worthiness of the person as opposed to the value of the collateral. We had hoped that the 2008 Housing Economic Recovery Act and the adoption of the Home Valuation Code of Conduct rules, along with the promise of appraiser independence by requiring the use of appraisal management companies to eliminate collusion between mortgage lenders and appraisers, would lead to fair valuations in black neighborhoods. Sadly, so far, our hopes have not been realized. Black neighborhoods remain undervalued and unappreciated. Too often, black families are unable to access low interest rates, obtain funds for education, debt consolidation, business creation, retirement, and other aspirations because of biased and unfair appraisals performed by someone who does not live in, now value the neighborhood itself. You know, in Philadelphia, and I love your city. I've driven the streets of North Philadelphia. I've walked the streets. I've gotten out and eaten at the small hole-in-the-wall type restaurants in North Philly, spoken at the Impact Church, and performed home ownership classes to try to bring in and improve black home ownership in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, a majority black city, 43.6% black, last year, in the most recent HMDA data year, there were 39,086 new mortgages of all types. There were 19,215 white loans, 6,145 black loans. The black denial rate is almost 3 times that of their non-Hispanic white peers. Black denial is 28.1%, and white denial is only 12.92%. The black approval rate is 46.93%, below 50%. in America, at the end of the Depression, white home ownership had dropped to 50%, and they created a brand new federal program called Fannie Mae to start and create new home ownership in America. Black home ownership has never been 50%. The highest it's ever been nationally is 49.1% in 2004. It took 13,354 black family applications to produce 6,145 new black mortgages. That's a lot of denials. How many of those denials were based on low valuation? I can't say. But let me say what else happens with low valuation. Because we have risk-based pricing that prices mortgages more based on down payment and or loan to value, what happens when your value comes in low, your mortgage costs more. When your mortgage costs more, generally they raise the interest rates to offset the cost, and you pay more, a black tax, because of your undervalued neighborhood based on historical, traditional racism and devaluation in our country than your white peers do, and it causes us to delay our building of wealth. On April 15, 2021, in the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Missouri and Richie Torres of New York introduced the Real Estate Valuation Fairness and Improvement Act. This act provides funding in the form of grants to state agencies, nonprofit organizations, and institutions of higher learning to promote diversity and inclusion in the appraisal profession, establishes and convenes a task force of policymakers as well as an advisory committee of interested stakeholders, including civil rights and consumer advocates, and proposes to fund scholarships and financial assistance to new appraisers during their apprenticeship and training program. We at the National Association of Real Estate Brokers believe that this is the sort of solution-based legislation that will work to break the chains of unfair and appraisal bias that are the norm in this country's communities of color. Let me say here too, we've got to start to encourage our young people to get into this business. We got to have appraisers that look like us. Not only do we have to encourage them to get into this business, but we got to support them when they do. We need to insist that there's some black appraisal management companies. There's a requirement by Fannie and Freddie and HUD of appraisal independence through the Home Valuation Code of Conduct. That means that there's appraisal management companies that are generally nationally. I'm in Los Angeles. I use an appraisal management company in Detroit to get appraisers here. When they brought this in and you had to use the appraisal management companies, all the local appraisers quit. All our black appraisers quit because they don't want to pay them but half of what they used to make. And so we started getting inexperienced appraisers from a different community in our community that have no idea of what our community is or like. As a matter of fact, they're scared to be there, so they hurry up and appraise it and get out of here. I just had an FHA appraisal that the appraiser commented, he made the appraisal subject to chipped and peeling paint on the windowsills and a poor roof. This lady we were refinancing to pay off her rehabilitation costs. She had all new windows and a brand new roof. He pulled the picture off the internet somewhere. He had never been to her house. That's the sort of thing that's happening when we have out of the area appraisers that have no sensitivity to what our needs are, and they're scared to be there to begin with. The National Association of Real Estate Brokers is in support of your resolution 210-208 to address the race gap in appraisals, and we ask you to join us in support of House Bill 2553. According to SOPAs, that bill has only a 32% chance of passing. I'm telling you that if we get on, if we support this, if we advocate properly, if we do not be silent, we can make this process move and get that bill, your resolution, and other bills around this country. I'm not in Philadelphia. I'm in Los Angeles. I speak all over the country, and in every place I speak, low appraisals is a problem in the black community. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you so much for your powerful testimony. Yeah, I feel like the more we talk about this, the more it hurts. To think that as a Black person, you do what everybody tells you you're supposed to. You work hard, you save your money to maybe get a chance at buying a home. And then when you want to sell that home and move to your next step, you have to scrub it of your very existence to maybe get a fair appraisal. It's just heartbreaking and infuriating. I support the bill that you mentioned. I'm sure every council member on this in this hearing does as well, and I look forward to ways that we can support you going forward. Councilmember Parker, I see you. Did you want to say anything before we move to the next?
No, council member. I'm going to wait until we hear from everyone. But listen, a councilwoman, I see Gautier and Brooks. I suggest we go to California right now and find a way to put a bag over Austin's head and kidnap him and bring him to the city of Philadelphia. But I'm gonna wait till everyone's my question, Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm glad he already came here and enjoyed North Philly. I'll get him out to West Philly and maybe we can keep him. Let's see. Mark Alston, are you there and connected?
No, that was me.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry. Carlo Batts, are you there and connected?
Yes, I
am. Can you state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Yes. Good morning. I'm Carlo Batts. I'm MAI, and I'm principal of Rittenhouse Appraisals. We are a regional real estate appraisal firm based in Philadelphia. I have a team of 8 that works in the appraisal field throughout the region. Give you a little bit of background about myself to kind of start out. As I said, I'm the principal of Rittenhouse Appraisals. I've been appraising real estate since 2004. Started my career in commercial banking with a regional bank, appraising for a regional bank. Once we were acquired, I started my firm in 2011. We have a crisis here in Philadelphia, and to respect to everybody that I talked to or listened to this morning, I think that some of these things are going to just kick the can down the road further and not really address the issues that we have going on in this city here specifically. The other cities and across the country I can't really speak to the level, but I'll go through kind of what I'm experiencing now. One, I like to also follow up and say that I am a victim of this as well as a person that is a practicing in this. In addition, I have right now within the last week, I have 3 appraisals in my inbox from friends from affluent residents of this city that have been stuck on appraisals. 2 were homeowners. 1 is an investor developer that is producing a project that he can't sell now because he's been stuck with low appraisals on 2 jobs. The overall dealing with the issue, I really think is so multifaceted. But I think a lot of what's going on right now is the changes of the mortgage laws that occurred in 2008 that came out of the housing bust. And Mr. Alston, who was on before me, kind of alluded to that. But these AMCs are all over the country. They are behooved to go with the lowest fee appraiser that they can find. And before the 2008 laws, a typical appraiser was making, let's say, $650 to do a residential assignment. Then they enacted the HVCC, which changed those laws, and now the typical appraiser is making $150 to $300 for an appraisal in this region. What has happened is that law has made these AMCs move towards hiring less qualified, cheaper appraisers that's untalented. They just got their license and they really don't know what they're doing, and they're being thrown a mass of work that they can't service. And it's a lot On top of them not knowing what they're doing, on top of the racial bias, on top of all this, it's just problems after problems that they're facing. To fix the problem, I think that it goes back to the original way that the appraisal industry was established. It did not take diversity into account. It did not take other communities or communities of color into account when they put these laws in place. I received my appraisal license by thankfully somebody at a corporation taking me in and giving me the opportunity to apprentice under them. That opportunity is not readily available to any person seeking to become an appraiser. More importantly, it's even more finite to a person of color that's looking to become an appraiser. Having to apprentice, historically, the appraisal industry is based upon being a mom and pop operation that is smaller and not focused on the small. So you have one or two guys, somebody will pass it down to his son, the father will train his son on how to become an appraiser. But we're looking at where we need right now, we need masses of appraisers to service our community. And to get that amount of people through the pipeline, this will take 10, 15, 20 years based upon the way of licensure is established for becoming an appraiser. To deal with that, I think that we're going to need a structural change overall in the licensing. This use of county appraisers or people, everybody says that they're appraisers from the county, they don't know their market, they're just coming in. Those same data appraisers are being used not just for mortgage appraisals, but they're used for estate appraisals, or somebody is just trying to find the value of their home to sell to a flipper or somebody else, and they come in and they low value their home, sell it to one of these wholesalers that then sell the property of their home for 3 times what it's worth. I'm seeing this stuff all across. I got so many instances that I've dealt with, help friends, help people. I get calls from people just out the blue asking me to help them, and I'm inundated with just that alone of low value appraisals happening. Another option that I think would work is that the city of Philadelphia look at potentially licensing appraisers themselves and making sure they would meet the guidelines and the thresholds. Then they could be held accountable for errors that they do in their reports. And then if their license is barred, then they can't practice in the city of Philadelphia. I wanted to address a couple of other things that I heard earlier today from the great people that participated in this. One is the use of the cost approach in the valuation of properties and leaning more on the cost approach. In other parts of the country, this may work, but we're in the oldest city in the country. The average age of the housing stock in this city is about 1915 to 1920. When you do the cost approach, you're taking land value and then adding in the depreciated value of the building improvements. That is going to lend more support to devaluing our properties in the city as compared to assisting them. That is because the housing is so old, it's very difficult to accurately find the depreciated value of the improvements. Also, the methods of construction has changed significantly over the last 100 years, and the cost sources that will be relied upon for finding the depreciated value is not based upon specifically how buildings were constructed here in the city of Philadelphia or in the Philadelphia region. Also, the value of property in Philadelphia is based upon, well, the cost approach is based upon the land value. And what I see happening is that land value will be toyed with, as I see the land values toyed with every day here now. And that is just leaving too many margins for error in there. Another thing that I would say is if you think the problem is bad now, within this market, if you put trainees out there and relying upon trainees to value real estate and something to happen, you're going further down the wrong path in this problem, because there are more unqualified than these jokers that's running around now, and will further destroy the generational wealth that I've personally participated and seen happen as part of my practice in this city. I can go on with more examples. There's a lot of, only thing I want to add, and another addition to this that I want to add, is that I understand that we're meeting here around the home appraisal issue, but really I would like to see y'all address this uniformly as an appraisal issue across the board, because in the commercial segment, I'm seeing the same type of robbery happen. I'm seeing individuals that are successful business owners that can't expand their business, they can't buy their property that they're now renting to become more, to grow even more, become even more successful. Is hindering the black developers, developers of color in the city, because they are stifled from getting into the projects that really will support their community, and in turn, it is running people out of the communities in which they grew up in, live, and want to support. It's a larger problem. It's a multifaceted problem. It ties directly to access to capital, as well as who these lenders refer to come value your property. And it kind of goes back to this AMC, because when I submit my mortgage application to the lender or the bank, I'm giving them, I'm doing that in confidence that they're going to send a qualified individual out to value my property, but instead they're sending this over to this AMC, who is not held to the same bars of regulations that the bank may be, and the bank gets to wash their hands of the problem. That AMC issue, as far as the home part, the AMC issue is a crucial thing that needs to be addressed immediately, like this week. It's something that can't get delayed anymore. It's something that can't, it's a core problem. And right now we're in this hot real estate market, and this hot real estate market is just increasing the crimes to happen and increasing this to go on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Betts, for your testimony, and thanks for sharing so much of your on-the-ground experience with us, and also helping us to see the scope of this problem, which also extends into the commercial market. Next, Annette Collier, I see you there and connected. Can you please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Yes, good morning, rather. My name is Annette Collier. I am a broker of Able Real Estate, and I am the past president and regional vice president for the Philadelphia Metropolitan Board of Realtors, which is a chapter of the oldest Black Real Estate Trade Association, which is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Thank you very much for the opportunity this morning. I want to thank you, Chairwoman Gauthier, members of the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless. I am here to testify on resolution number 210208. I would like to acknowledge through my professional observation that there is, in fact, a racial gap in the Black and Brown community. My fear is that this problem will be even worse due to COVID-19. Prior to the pandemic and currently, there has been a shortage of inventory and gentrification that has and continues to happen. The Black and Brown community has yet to find out the true impact on real estate. The fear of foreclosures, the inability to refinance or modify their loans due to credit issues and loss of jobs. We as people of color are always at a higher risk in every aspect of life. Black and brown homeowners and buyers need help, and it is my hope that this committee moves forward in curing the gap for the sake of creating opportunities for decreasing poverty and expanding homeownership. Right now, there are so many people waiting to buy, but there are many offers that are in excess of the market values. The average buyer today needs to have $20,000 or more in reserves. There are some sellers that are only entertaining offers that are without financing from FHA or VA. These loans are usually needed for Black and brown people for the down payment, which are 0% for VA loans and 3.5% for FHA loans. With the pandemic, many renters do not want to be in shared spaces, so they are giving up the leases and buying, but the disenfranchised can't compete in the rental or sales market. Not being able to receive a lease or own properties leads to homelessness. When I speak of homelessness, that is inclusive of people who do not have a deed or lease. Gentrification has happened all over the city. There's been increased values on properties, sales prices, and taxes on the properties. Appraisers are essential in the valuation process because they make the judgment calls. They choose value. One of the things that is concerning is the fact that there are not many minority appraisers. Oftentimes, appraisers who are not from the area come into the Black and brown communities to state values, and they are unfamiliar with existing or future development, city plans, schools, and community development corporations. For example, if there is a development site for low to moderate housing, they are selling or sold, they may not be presented on a multiple listing system, which is where most real estate professionals review to see current listings and sold properties. Therefore, joining in this same area or housing in the same area may have long-term homeowners who have not sold or refinanced, so there will not be new comparable sales information. The appraiser who is not knowledgeable may overlook these new developments to include in their appraisal report. This is problematic. Homeowners who want to refinance and have an appraiser unfamiliar with their area and community can receive an unfair low valuation. Black people historically have received low values, but when white people come into a community, it is perceived that a neighborhood or community is increasing in value. There are sellers who choose to do business only with wholesalers, or we buy homes for sale companies rather than going through the appraisal process, in fear of the risk in finding out appraisal values that may not maximize the full value. The understanding of equity in the community is very important. It is no doubt equity leads to wealth and other opportunities to buy more investments that can benefit individuals and families, inclusive of children's future. Unfortunately, Black and brown consumers are not aware of resources such as real estate professionals, city plans, community development corporations, and housing counseling agencies. Real estate licensees who subscribe to the multiple listing system and are active in doing business in communities can be great resources in letting people know what prices are currently on the market, as well as property values on properties that have sold. This information can support a homeowner as to whether they are selling too low. Buyers and sellers also have the right to appeal appraisals. Appraisers, when challenged, have to be willing to assess the information that they may have overlooked and be willing to make changes if needed without allowing their personal egos to be bruised. Real estate professionals can be an asset in educating the appraiser, especially those not from the area. It is my belief that the race gap in home appraisals can be resolved. Truly, there is a dire need to have more people of color as appraisers in Philadelphia who understand their communities and positive changes. Most people of color's greatest asset will be home ownership, whether first generation or existing homeowners, and they must be informed about what equity is and how they can leverage their equity. Historically, redlining cannot continue to create inequity for Black and brown people's opportunity to create wealth. I also want to state that at one point I was selling a property, and it was interesting. We're getting many showings. I had black art, I had my family's photos up, and immediately upon taking them down, the property sold to someone who did not look like me. In addition to that, I have appealed appraisals because of an appraiser not knowing what was going on in the community. So I want to thank you for your attention to this matter, and I hope that what I shared today can help in resolving this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Collier. I have two questions, and then we'll move on to questions and comments from Majority Leader Parker and the rest of the committee. My first question is for Michael Cunningham and John Russell. Both of you spoke pretty eloquently about what is going on and the bias that exists in the appraisal industry. I'd like to hear more about how the American Society of Appraisers is using what you know about what's happening to change how appraisals are done going forward, both as a national organization and locally.
Well, thanks so much, Chairwoman Gauthier, and I'll go first and see if Michael has anything to add. Organizationally, this is a topic that we were engaged with even prior to the events of last spring and the engagement around the social justice movement. We had started a diversity and inclusion committee about 18 months ago, so again, predating everything, and we took this as a very important responsibility because we just recognized the need to have a profession that looked more like the people it served. From that point forward, obviously, we've had a much more fulsome conversation around the topic of appraisal bias and what needs to be done to address it. So some of the things that we've done, we've held unconscious bias training that was provided free of charge to any appraiser, not just a member of our organization or the other professional appraisal organizations that we worked with to develop and present that training. We continue to work on additional trainings as well that we can offer into the appraisal community. We're supportive of federal legislation. We've all talked about it today, House Resolution 2553, and kind of the holistic approach it takes to looking at various factors that feed in to driving devaluation in minority communities, because there's no single factor that you can identify that you say, if I can solve for this one thing, I've solved for everything. Instead, it's several components you have to unpack simultaneously, some of which are outside the control of the appraiser. It may be at the lender level, it may be at the secondary market level. So we need to make sure to capture every potential contributory factor and address them as part of a long-term lasting solution. I think 2553, which is the bill that we contributed to and that we support, will go a long way to really providing that understanding and giving us the actionable items we need to move forward. We've also been working at the state level. States like California and your neighbors in New Jersey have looked at ways to better educate and inform the appraiser professional in terms of discrimination and bias and what it is they need to understand their responsibility is, increasing the educational requirements in that front, also providing more disclosure on the home buyer or homeowner front as to what their rights of recourse are. We've heard a lot of conversation today about the different ways you appeal an appraisal. There's channels through the lender. There's often channels through your state appraiser board. There's different vehicles that you can avail yourself of that, frankly, your average home buyer or homeowner is just not going to be aware of, and they're going to rely on that real estate professional to assist them. And they're going to hope that their broker is going to engage them, their mortgage broker will engage them as well and give them those tools. But there's different solutions that are out there. We try to be proactive about it. We recognize this as a problem. And we're just trying to find solutions that are going to be durable and they're going to really address the totality of the problem, because we do see it as a very multifaceted issue.
Did you have anything to add, Michael?
Jamie, I want to thank you all for inviting us today. I do not want to dodge any issues, because I think all of the issues that you bring up are very salient. I think it's very important to note, though, that the appraisal industry as a whole is extremely fragmented. The two largest membership organizations for appraisers in the U.S. are the Appraisal Institute and the American Society of Appraisers. The second of which John and I are, speaking of on behalf today, are actually a multidisciplinary disciplinary membership organization, and we don't actually, have that many real estate appraisers. The Appraiser Institute is really the primary organization for real property appraisers. But all that said, if you were to take our combined membership and look at, I think there's 80,000 real estate appraisers in the United States. I would say maybe 10 or 15% of them are members of either of our organizations. So the vast majority are not members of any membership organizations. In order to be a real estate appraiser, what you primarily need is you need a real estate license that is issued at the state level. And so many of these issues are really issues that need to be addressed at the state level.
Okay. Is there any way to tie membership to an appraiser's performance in this area?
Well, I mean, there are appraisal ethics boards, and, I have to be quite blunt. Having a racist appraiser is completely unethical, and you can, report somebody to there's a variety of boards at the state level, and I'm sure we have local ethics committees as well. And those are taken very seriously, and, if an appraiser is unethical, that is an extremely serious issue. And whether that's racism or whether it's other corruption or whatever the case may be, I'd have to think a little bit more about your question because I'm not sure there's any easy answers.
Yeah, and to maybe dovetail Chairwoman Gauthier on what Michael said, there's an ethics rule in the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, and any action that would be biased or discriminatory on the part of the appraiser would run counter to that ethics rule. And where you have a use path violation, you have something that's actionable by a state appraiser board where they can look at that appraiser, they can investigate the extent of what took place, what actually happened, and then decide what level of sanction, all the way up to and including revocation of license is appropriate. So there's already vehicles there today that, again, I think sometimes individuals are not necessarily aware of fully to be able to get recourse when something like discrimination or bias occurs. Organizationally, we have our own code of ethics and we have our own ethics committee and we investigate claims against our members. But as Michael pointed out, only about 15 to 20% nationwide of real estate appraisers belong to a professional appraisal organization. The vast majority are out there working independently or working as part of a small appraisal business, and they don't have an organization like ours that they can lean on for those resources and that will also hold them accountable directly. And so a lot of this does have to flow from the state because once the state will mandate certain expectations, be it around education or performance, that's going to trickle down to the whole of your appraiser population as opposed to just those within specific appraisal organizations such as ours.
Thank you. I'll cede my next question and move on to Majority Leader Parker.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Gauthier, and thank each and every one of you on this panel for your testimony. Let me go back and just note for the record that when we talk about the work group to address the issues that we've heard today, we are going to do so in a very unified manner, strongly relying on intergovernmental cooperation and planning so that, we don't, have any knee-jerk reactions, right? So we're going to make sure that we're in a contact with our Philadelphia delegation in the House and the Senate. We're going to get a leader and Whip Harris, along with Jason Dawkins, members in the House. We will get Vincent Hughes, our appropriations chair, Senator Williams, and I think Tina Tartaglione is along with the Senate delegation. And then we will also rely on our congressional delegation, Boyle, Evans, Scanlon, and Senator Casey, and we will reach out to Senator Toomey's office as well, as long as he is still representing us. So we will have an intergovernmental approach to addressing this. With this said, Michael, I want to start off by saying this to you. I feel just a tad bit better understanding and knowing your background in community organizing and when you and I interacted to help us navigate this space. Okay? So I feel like we have an honest broker with you.
Of course, you can call me anytime, Sarah.
because again, so I'm trying to take that in a very affirmative perspective. Sure. Because as I'm going through your testimony, and I want to start with yours first, I appreciate your letting us know you're only one, of only two ASA members and real property appraisers who live and work in Philadelphia, and you only know two other trainees. With that being said, I'm looking at my notes while you're testifying. We need more PHL appraisers, right? So my question is, has the ASA, from your perspective, have they developed any apprenticeships, mentoring programs that they've proactively promoted in an effort to partner?
Yes, but I do want to point out that Julian at the beginning testified that there is some new, I don't know how successful it's going to be, but one of the challenges is that in order to be an appraiser, you have to have 3,000 hours of experience, and you need a mentor to supervise you for that time. And so I'm not sure exactly who it is, but there's a new process where instead of doing 3,000 hours of experience, you can actually do case studies. And that would allow you to gain the experience that you need to, do qualified appraisals. And I think that is really the direction in which the profession as a whole is moving. But I will say that the ASA we have an ASA foundation which provides scholarships and whatnot, and to veterans, to people of color, and we have provided some support to people entering the profession, and we do our best, So, and I will note, this is probably not common knowledge, but Johnny White, who is the CEO he's the head of the ASA, he's actually African American, and he's a professional association, manager. He's been phenomenal on this issue. And he's also a professor at Georgetown University. And so education of young people is near and dear to his heart. And he's been working on this issue very diligently.
Well, I just want to note for the record that I out of every crisis comes opportunity, right. Even in the midst of this global pandemic. And because we've raised this issue, we out of this, and particularly out of that work group, again, we're going to be very much solutions oriented. And I see my colleague, council member Brooks on screen right now. Councilwoman, I smell a workforce development and Gaultier opportunity with CCP, Philadelphia's college. Okay. And not just for, talking about young people in high school and getting them acclimated, but I'm talking about grown folks, who are right now and ready. So that's something else that we will put on the table. In addition to that, Michael, in your testimony, you talked about OPA. And the extent that OPA can provide internships to college students. And, and this is a way that the city could increase exposure to concepts in real estate appraising. Let me ask you this. With this in mind, and I appreciate your sort of seeing that this could be an opportunity, let me formally ask, before we move forward, has ASA ever reached out to OPA, our Office of Property Assessment, to talk to them about developing a formal relationship? And we would need to know that, because if you have reached out to OPA, and what we will do now is say, wait a minute now, OPA, ASA reached out to you. It's fine.
No, so the trainer, we only have the other person who lives in the city and who is a member of the ASA worked for OPA. And he is actually the trainer for OPA.
Okay.
So, and his name is Rob Luciani, and Rob he's been the most active, he's our most valued ASA local member in real property, and he is a long-time employee of OPA, and he does the training for ethics at OPA.
Okay, so one of the things we're going to make sure we do, and we know our staffs are taking lots and lots of notes, and that is we're gonna make sure we include this in our OPA questioning during our budget process, right? So I know Council Members Gaultier and Brooks, we got that down, right? This needs to be added to that list. Directly to John Russell. John, I want to ask you as the strategic partnership officer for ASA. I want to ask you, aside from what you heard Cunningham mention, what do you feel like the ASA has done sort of being proactively? You talked about you formed the D&I committee 18 months ago. You said you had this unconscious bias training, but when you mentioned that, was that a voluntary training or was that a required training?
So at the time the training was offered, it was voluntary. The expectation going forward within the profession is that this is going to move toward mandatory training. And again, that's best set at the state level, because if we as an organization mandate it, that's only going to reach a certain percentage of the appraiser population. When it's a matter of state law where your state mandates you will do X number of hours on training, California uses the language elimination of bias. Your neighbors in New Jersey use unconscious bias, but they mandate at least 2 hours, which is a good start, and it's going to be on an ongoing basis. Folks like Michael, they take continuing education on a 2-year recertification cycle. So they'd be getting 2 hours of that training every 2 years, which is a good foundation. Bear in mind that we as a profession, while we did cover fair housing impacts as part of your qualifying education and on a somewhat ongoing basis in continuing education, that's only part of the conversation. So having a more robust volume around anti-discrimination is going to be important going forward. But again, the best place to set that's at the state level, because then it hits everybody. So that's something that your folks down in Harrisburg would really want to take up and put on. One thing I want to just, if I could have 30 seconds to point out, because you did bring up 2 things I want to touch on. And I wish the Appraisal Foundation was here today, or one of their representatives, because they could really speak more to this. A great opportunity for community colleges in particular. The Appraiser Qualifications Board will come in and look at the curriculum that your community colleges have in the city, if you have them in the city of Philadelphia, and they will give qualifying education hours, the hours you have to get to become an appraiser for college courses you've already taken. So that helps to reduce the burden on individuals entering the profession, because they'll simultaneously be working towards, say, that associate's degree in a community college setting, as well as getting hours that will count toward what they need for their license to enter the appraisal profession. So that is, I think, another opportunity as well to really use the resources you already have in the community. And that review is free of charge. The AQB will come in and do that with no charge to the educational institution seeking to have their programs reviewed. The most important thing you have to have, though, is you've got to have somebody dedicated to facilitating the review on the institution side. But if that's there, it's a fairly painless process, and the AQB is always looking for new universities and colleges to work with in reviewing what they offer and kind of allocating the different qualifying education hours that would be required to enter the profession.
So, John, I want to say again a special thank you to you and Michael for being here today. We need to have the industry at the table when we're trying to proffer any solutions, right? So we don't develop legislation in the silo in this body. And when you talk about the role of the state, I had the great honor and privilege of serving as a legislator long enough to find my way to the bathroom in Harrisburg. And I was a very active member of our professional licensure committee and fought hard to get on that professional licensure committee. And so I know both members, Leader McClinton and Whip Harris, they will be able to help us in ensuring that we have access to staff from professional licensure when we're working through our work group. And we're going to ask both you and Michael, John, to help us and have a seat at the table, because the one thing we won't do is we won't attempt to develop solutions for industry and not give the industry an opportunity to have a seat at the table while we're doing that. So I want to thank you for your testimony. Madam Chair, I just want to quickly go through the last 3 folks who testified. We already commented on you, Mark Austin. I don't have any questions for you. The only thing I know is that while I would hope that we would, when we have this work group, our meetings could be in person. But whether we're meeting in person, we will be connecting you virtually. because you don't even have the opportunity, Mark Austin, to tell us you're not going to help us with this work group because we need your on the ground experience. But I do want to give you the opportunity, especially after hearing the industry. Are there any follow-up comments you want to make, or if you had your ability to wave the magic wand right now, Mark, and talk to the industry to say, this is what I wish you would do right now, that doesn't have anything to do with any laws being passed at the local, state, or federal level. This is what I wish the industry itself right now would do. What would that be, Mark Austin?
Thank you for asking me and allowing me to have additional comments. This was a great opportunity to hear on a pragmatic practitioner and policy level some of the things that are going on. I think his name is Mr. Betts, who I really appreciate his comments, the guy who spoke after me. What I would, and I don't think I said, was the formation of Black appraisal management or others companies. We've got to encourage, we've got to get at, not just as an appraiser, but at the management and entrepreneurial supervisory level, so that we are the ones hiring the appraisers and setting the standards. And then we've got to incentivize the lenders to partner with those appraisal management companies nationally, so that we get the opportunity to have our appraisers that we're encouraging to get into the business, to then sign up with an appraisal management company that is sensitive to their community, and then get the lenders incentivized by FHFA and HUD to provide diversity, not just in the appraiser process, but in the appraisal management process.
Appraisal management process.
The appraisal management companies are required to be used based on the Home Valuation Code of Conduct, so that there's appraiser independence. There's no communication between the mortgage lender and the appraiser. The appraisal management company is that in-between piece. They have resulted in higher priced appraisals, lower paid appraisers, and less portability, taking your appraisal from one lender to the next. There's a number of things that have impacted our community that if we had a diverse appraisal management company group, it would help. I use one that's in Detroit. I'm in California.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you so very much. Mr. Batts, I'm going to ask you the same question. If you had it your way, and I want to thank you just so very much, for your real time, PHL experience, right? And sharing what that's like. I want to just ask you the same question. You have the ability to wave the magic wand. It doesn't require any legislation from local, state, and federal government. If you could talk to the industry right now and say, industry, this is what I wish you would do to help, close the gap or, eliminate, bias, racial bias in the appraisal process.
First, thank you. What I would like to see is, number one, we got to cut these AMCs off. We got to restructure the way these AMCs are done. Number two, I think the fees that's being sent to the appraisers needs to be increased. I think that an average appraiser should receive a fee of roughly $1,000 to do an appraisal. That way he's not running around trying to load up on these assignments that's been sent out to him at a low fee. We're responsible, to that point, we're responsible for, let's say, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a residential mortgage transaction, and they're getting less than 1% of that mortgage cost to determine whether you should do the deal or not. It structurally doesn't make sense. Two, what I would like to see is that the whole way that the licensure process needs to be restructured to allow to take the burden off small mom and pops for bringing in trainees. Right now, if you're a licensed appraiser, you only can have 3 trainees up under you. People are sending, no matter how you change it or add more people to take the classes, there is not enough qualified licensed appraisers to train these individuals. We need boots on the ground as far as qualified people. Also, I would like to see something where the quality of the appraiser is improved that we have coming out to do these appraisals. I'd like to add to the previous comments. I'm a designated member. I'm an MAI of the Appraisal Institute, which is the highest designation in the real estate appraisal field. We too have a program that's focused on, number one, reaching out and creating more diversity in the appraisal field, as well as working with HBCUs to include the curriculum on their campus as well. It's a process. Some stuff like this is not going to change overnight, but unfortunately, we don't have time on our side. These things are happening today. A year from now, 2 years from now, there's going to be a considerable amount of wealth eroded or stolen due to these problems within the mortgage industry that's happening right now.
Right now. Thank you so very much for your testimony. I want you to know, Carlo, I'm biased. I hope LU, the mighty Lincoln Lions, they on the HBCU list. I'm a buy it. I'm alum, right? And our neighbors, Cheney. And we'll talk offline, because if I need to be making any connections, you let me know. I'll do it.
I need you.
Okay, that's it. It's enough said. It's done. Finally, I want to ask you, Ms. Collier, the same question. Ms. Collier, no local, state, or federal legislation necessary amongst the industry. You have the magic wand. What do you want them to do right now to help solve this crisis?
To provide opportunities for minorities to be involved in the appraisal business all the way around. And also, in that happening, it could very well create opportunities that don't exist. And again, that's for the first-time home buyer as well as for those existing homeowners who want to refinance. In addition to that, just more information provided to the public regarding what equity is, and for people not to just give their homes away. And I'm also a LU. So thank you.
Hey, listen, I want to say thank you all so very much for your testimony. And Madam Chair, thank you for your leeway. I've got to give credit where credit is due, and say to, my good friend, Ira Goldstein, along with my new friend, Professor Squires, had you not, as usual, from a data-driven and research-based approach, informed me that this racial inequity and these disparities and appraisals were taking place, I would have thought that, we nailed this when we dealt with predatory lending. But here's another layer, right, that we continue to have to peel back in order to see some access to equity and opportunity, particularly from an economic perspective. And I've said it once and I'm going to say it again, and I don't care how uncomfortable I make people when I say this. Over the past year, we've heard people put their fists in the air, put sexy mission statements on their website, and march in solidarity with Black and brown people and say Black Lives Matter. And I think most people in their heart of hearts, they really do mean that. But I really want to see the same persistence, the same outrage, the same, interest in wanting to present solutions when it comes to access to economic opportunity, like owning and building and ownership in homes and in businesses, as we've heard today, because Black lives don't matter until Black people have access to self-sufficiency. And so thank you all so very much for your testimony. We will be getting together sooner rather than later. And just thank you again, Madam Chair, for the leeway you provided.
Thank you, Majority Leader, and I agree with you 100%. Council Member Brooks, do you have questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and Madam Majority Leader, for this hearing. It's been like, wow, for me. Just wow. And it even touched on some issues that aren't directly related, but are related. When I think of how, can Black folks get ahead in the system that was never designed for them? The system was designed, we were product. So we have to continue to focus on how to rise up above that. So I thank each and every one of the panelists for the insight on how we could get educated and work to change policy around the appraisal process. We talked about taxation, and we also started talking about access to home ownership. So my question in that, I think Ms. Collier brought it up, and I've been talking about this for some time and just a little bit more understanding on, someone else brought this up, when in traditionally Black neighborhoods, folks are trying to acquire homes that are still affordable in the city. And they run into this issue around not being, sellers aren't willing to take FHA or VA loans. Everything is a commercial loan. So I was wondering, do you guys have any insight on how we can work to get around that? Because when we talk about, I live in North Philadelphia, and when people talk about buying the block, everybody doesn't want to buy the block to rent it out. Some folks would like to still stay in the neighborhood that they traditionally grew up in, but we constantly find this commercial loan only provision on properties. Do you guys have any insight on how we can get around that or work to change that here in Philadelphia?
I think that preparing buyers, particularly in this economy, it is very sad because homeowners, they have the freedom to sell their properties and, the way that they choose. I think one of the answers to that is to create more low to moderate housing. There is a need all across this country for that. And Philadelphia being a major city with a lot of minorities, I really believe that has to be done. Development opportunities have to be given, and investors have to see an incentive to do that. And I think that's a part of what's lacking.
Anybody else want to chime in on that question?
I will make a small comment, Jamie. Can you see me? So it's worth keeping in mind that one of the reasons housing prices are so high in the city of Philadelphia, and the reason is the inventory is very low. We have not built enough housing over the past, 15 to 20 years, and the millennial generation is the largest generation in American history, and they want to settle down and have kids. So I think there's a puzzle that we can solve, right? There's a puzzle that we can solve that says that pro-growth, where we provide more housing, but we also provide more affordable housing, and that's something that City Council needs to work on.
Thank you.
Can I add a statement too? I think that if we're going to address that in that manner, we're going to need to look at the zoning code and create more dense development where it's capturing more of demand around areas that the influx of population wants to be, or the millennials, quote unquote, want to be, and then it'll preserve our neighborhoods for more home ownership, as well as we are running short on affordable quality housing as well. So I think it's a universal approach to attacking this real estate problem.
Jamie, hi, this is Mark Squilla. I just wanted to add too, and I think maybe, with the opportunity, I know Councilmember Green had brought up about public banking and what opportunities that may have a play in something like this, where we could use a public bank to have access for home ownership. It's so important. I mean, when we talk about the equity of it, and when we talked about, so we were blue in the face, and Councilmember Parker brought it up about OPA and then how they assess properties and the challenges there. Supposedly, we have a CAMA system now. We're going to be able to fix some of these things, but we'll see. But it's just, if we could either combine these ideas with the possibility of public banking and some other changes that we make in our way of doing things, maybe it is possible to keep people in their homes and also get people to be first-time home buyers. We've done it with a lot of the money into the Housing Trust Fund and first-time home buyer. We did a lot of programs in my district, and one thing people say, even for affordable rentals, said, I would love to own my own house. So people still want to own their own homes, and we need to find ways to make that available. So just throwing that idea out there.
Thank you, Council Member. That's a great point. Council Member Brooks, did you have more questions or comments?
No, that concludes my questions and comments. Thank you guys for this amazing panel, and thank you for Majority Leader for your vision.
Thank you. Council Member Dom, did I see you raise your hand?
I did. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to thank the Majority Leader for bringing this forward. And I just wanted to state that I'd be happy to work on any of the committees if you'd like my help. And number two, this is the time right now in our lives where interest rates are probably the lowest I've ever seen in my life. And this is a time where existing homeowners, we should be educating them on refinancing their loans, taking money, if they can, out if they want to buy other homes and build wealth, or just lowering their payments. But the education process of helping homeowners buy in this interest market, helping existing homeowners refinance, helping existing homeowners build wealth by taking out some money for down payments for refinancing. This is the time. Interest rates have never been lower in the last, 50 years. This is the time right now. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you. Are there any other questions and/or comments from members of the committee for this panel?
Madam Chair, just one thing, and I hate to do this to Councilmember Dom because I'm still in learning mode. Councilmember Dom, I want you to just repeat for the benefit of the viewing public, along with members of this committee, the two things that you just shared with us when we were taking our tour of the laborers Sam State and Junior Apprenticeship Building on Broad Street about ownership and wealth. Can you just share that for the viewing public?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Majority Leader. I think I said that you make a living working and you create wealth investing and owning. And the second one was when you rent, it's a house, but when you buy, it's a home. So thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Councilmember Dom.
Thank you so much. Okay. There being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I will ask if there is anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call and that wishes to offer testimony on the resolution being considered today. Okay. Majority Leader, do you have any closing comments?
No, just one thing that I just got, Madam Chair, from my expert researcher, Ira Goldstein, that the appraisal, if honestly showing a rise in value, he says that it could help people cancel their mortgage insurance as their equity rises over 20%. And he says this could make a real difference in a family's budget. So as our work group gets formed and we move forward by bringing all of our members along with the people who testified today together, this is something that we will take a very close look at. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you. This concludes the business before the Committee on Housing, Neighborhood Development, and the Homeless today. I want to thank all of the panelists for the critical information that you shared, and thanks again to Majority Leader Parker for bringing this resolution forward, and to all members of the committee. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great job.